Okay, this is the first part of the subsistence lecture, and I'm going to break this actually into 4 parts as I go along. Just keep the video lengths shorter, so there'll be a second part of this coming today as well. Pardon me. Okay, subsistence, if you need a definition of that, it's just whatever you do to make a living. And so we're going to be talking about different ways of making a living. First one we're going to talk about is foraging. We'll contrast that with food producing, and then we'll talk a little bit more about foraging in this section. Before we go further, I want to point out that the required readings have been posted online. They are as follows: The Original Affluent Society by Marshall Solins, and The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race by Jared Diamond. You can find those in the supplemental readings folder as of right now. Okay, we're going to divide subsistence strategies broadly into 2 categories: food foragers and food producers. Food foragers, hunt, fish, and gather wild plants. They're also called hunter-gatherers. I should point out that wild is the important part of this. Well, they're all important parts, but we want to remember that they rely on wild foods because that'll contrast them with food producers who create and manage their own food supplies. They generally do this through something called domestication, which is something that's come up earlier in the course. If you don't have it in your notes, here's a definition of it. Domestication is what happens when people modify the genetic material of plants or animals for their own use. Pardon me. They began to do this about 10,000 years ago, and the first thing that they domesticated was the wolf, which they turned into a dog. They did this, they didn't use genetic engineering or anything like that to change the genetic material of the wolves. What they did was something called selective breeding. And that's when people choose the individuals that are allowed to breed within a population. So presumably they were competing with the wolves, hunting, herding animals, other animals, and they killed off the parents and kept the offspring, and then they selectively bred the ones that had the best traits for their purposes, and eventually got dogs. Later on, people applied that to plants and all kinds of other animals and used that to create and manage their own food supplies. So they developed 3 total strategies of food producing. In this section of the lecture, we're only going to talk about food foragers, also known as hunter-gatherers. First, we'll talk about land use, and I want to introduce the term carrying capacity. Excuse me. Carrying capacity refers to the number of people that a given piece of land can support at a given level of technology. Now, the level of technology in this case is food foraging or hunting and gathering. We'll talk about carrying capacity in relation to other means of subsistence, other levels of technology, and you'll see that the carrying capacity will become greater and greater as we go along because those other strategies are more efficient. Food foraging is the least efficient strategy in terms of the amount of time and energy you have to invest in order to get something out of the land. It also has the lowest carrying capacity. I should point out that hunter-gatherers are generally nomadic. It's almost necessary to their lifestyle, except in a very few cases. Nomadic means that you move around continually in search of food. That doesn't mean that you just move around randomly. In fact, they move around in a relatively consistent pattern called a daisy pattern. A daisy pattern is something I'm going to illustrate using the print to the left here. This is just a wallpaper with some flower pictures on it. We have to imagine this is a topographical map of an area controlled by a hunting and gathering group. Imagine that the daisies map out their use of the land throughout their territory. All right, so the center of the daisy is something we should visualize as a base camp. So they'll have a temporary camp in the center, and the petals represent the foraging paths. So they'll go out and hunt and gather in an elliptical pattern, go out one side, come back the other. This may be a 2, 3, 4 day walk from the camp, and then maybe they'll stay there for a little bit, and then when they go back out again, they'll go right next to it and do the same thing. They do this all the way around the base camp until they've exploited all of the area around the base camp. Then they pick up, move twice as far away, and set up another base camp, and begin the process all over again. Right? So that's called a daisy pattern, and as you can see, it allows them to use their entire territory pretty much. Excuse me. There are some exceptions to that. or some things that can interfere with a perfect daisy pattern in a hunter-gatherer territory. One of those is seasonality. If you don't recall what that means, we did talk about it during the methods lecture. Seasonality just means that there are different things that happen at different times of the year. Right? For example, there might be, in this case, there might be a river that runs through part of the territory, say down here, and maybe they're way up at this camp at the time that there is a massive fish run in this river. So they may stop what they're doing up here and move down here, thus modifying their daisy pattern in order to exploit that particular resource. That's one example. Another thing that may influence the daisy pattern is geography. Suppose there's a mountain up in this corner of the territory. Now, in the lowlands of the mountain, it's possible that they can still forage and find food. There's a tree line at the top of a mountain where nothing really grows. So up in this area, they may just never use it. Right? So seasonality and geography can influence the daisy pattern, which is otherwise regular and allows hunter-gatherers to fully use their territory. In terms of the technology that they use, it's going to obviously be specific to however they're making a living. Some may rely more on fishing, some more on hunting. Almost all rely in large part on gathering. That means gathering plant materials for food and other uses. For gathering, you'd need tools for gathering, cutting tools, containers of all sorts, baskets, bags, buckets, so all sorts of containers. Cutting tools, knives of various sorts. They could be using stone tools or steel tools, depending on their access to things. Digging sticks are an important tool, and also very simple. When you just take a stick and you sharpen the end of it, and you can use it to dig up tubers. That's spelled T-U-B-E-R. A potato is an example of a tuber if you've never encountered that term before. Also yams, which are wild staples in many parts of the world. All right. Let's see, hunting tools. I've got a couple of examples here. Pardon me. A couple of examples here. First of these is the toggle head harpoon, which you can see up to the right here. And we've got a couple more examples of that right there. And you can see that it has basically three traits in common. This is used in Arctic areas. It's got a barbed point on the end. It's got a hole in it that you can run a line through, and a means of seating it into a haft, H-A-F-T, which is a handle. And it's meant to come loose from the handle when it hits something. So this is used in Arctic areas where one of the major food sources is large aquatic mammals. And one of the reasons that they developed this technology is because they tend to sink when they die. They have very dense bones, and when they die, it's a soft material that brings them to the surface, so that's no longer functioning properly. They sink straight to the bottom. A toggle head harpoon allows them to retrieve the animal once it's killed. As an example of one way in which that's used, they would set up a stakeout around a seal hole, because seals are mammals and they need to breathe, and look out over the pack ice. And then they would stand there and wait, and when the seal was below, they'd plunge it down through there. Then they'd have to call all the other people in their hunting party and pack out the ice and pull the seal up. But it prevents them from losing the animals. There's another example over here of blowgun. That's another specialized technology, not for an Arctic, but a rainforest environment. And it's been developed 3 different times independently in the world. That means that people didn't communicate with each other in developing it. It was just a response to the circumstances they were in. It was for hunting high in a canopy in a forest. That's where the trees meet up above the forest floor. And it tends to be rich in biodiversity, and there's a lot of life up there, and a lot of stuff to eat. So they had to get to it, so they developed a blowgun to reach those high areas. Right, another thing I can point out about hunter-gatherer technology is that most of what they have is portable, and that's because they're nomadic. If they're moving around continually, then they don't really want to carry anything they don't have to. Not to mention that there's a calorie cost to carrying things around in the forest. Or in the tundra, no matter where you are. So they tend to have no fixed structures. That is, they don't build permanent houses or villages. They may rebuild an old structure, but nothing is built to last forever. And it's fairly expected that they'll have to do some maintenance or build a new habitation when they move somewhere else. They may have something called site furniture, though. Excuse me. And that's something that we're all kind of familiar with. It's just we haven't probably heard that term. An example of site furniture is a park bench. It's something that's big and heavy, and we can just leave it where it is without worrying about it decaying or walking off. Park bench, we just chain it to a tree and leave it out in the weather, and it's fine. Site furniture in a hunting and gathering context may include hearth features. It's Hearth. Hearth feature is any place people start and use a fire. So they may build fire rings, barbecues, who knows. Also seats, things that are good to cook on. A lot of times large stones or logs make good seats sometimes. If they find one that's useful, they'll drag it up to the hearth feature and leave it there. And that's called site furniture. Okay. Social organization for foraging peoples. Foragers live generally in band-level societies. That is a term that we're going to talk further about when we get to politics. And we'll talk about bands, tribes, chiefdoms, and states. I'm not bringing up the other forms of political organization in the subsistence lecture, but I am bringing, because there's more complexity involved, but I am bringing up bands in relation to foragers because almost all foragers live in bands. So everything we say about bands is true of foragers, and everything we say about foragers is true of bands generally. The size of a band level society is typically 50 to 300 people. There's a bottom limit that's, well, we'll talk about that in a second. There's an upper limit of about 300, and that's based on the carrying capacity of the strategy. Generally, the amount of land that people can control in a hunting and gathering group will support about 300 people, given that they are making a living by hunting and gathering. The lower limit is a matter of security of the group. If the groups fall below 50, then there's not enough insurance against people getting injured, not enough protection against competitive groups that may raid them. They need to have a military defense. So they're relatively small groups, between 50 and 300 people. All of these people are related to one another biologically. It's a set of multiple families, and they do have a practice of exogamy. That's Exogamy. Exogamy. I think it's come up before in class, but I'm not sure. It's a practice of marrying outside of your social group, and they maintain that because they want to avoid incest taboos. They recognize that consanguineally close relationships are not good breeding relationships, and so they marry outside of their groups. Everywhere you go, people have an incest taboo, and we'll talk more about that when we get to family and kinship. These groups are basically egalitarian in nature. And egalitarian means that no person has any more status than anybody else in the group as a rule. That is, they don't have more wealth, they don't have more power. There may be small prestige differences, but they're not really that significant. So they're basically egalitarian groups. I can say that they're generally egalitarian, meaning every person's equal to every other person. But they're also sexually egalitarian as a rule, meaning there's not a status disparity between men and women that is substantial. That said, there is something called the sexual division of labor. Sexual division of labor simply means that men and women in a group are doing different jobs. And that is consistent across the hunting and gathering world. And generally speaking, if we were to generalize on the point, men do most of the hunting and women do most of the gathering. Right? But yeah, we may talk about that more later. Food sharing is another important part of social organization among hunter-gatherers. This is a system for distributing food. It's a set of rules associated with hunting or gathering in which you distribute whatever you hunt or gather to other people in your group. And usually that's based on kinship relations, but it also can be based on other roles and personal debt as well. Right? There's a system of extensive indebtedness in these groups. You owe everybody in your group, and everybody in your group probably owes you. Let me just show you a quick example of that. This is a little bit of an unusual example because it's from the Arctic, where people rely heavily on these large aquatic mammals like a whale. People in the Arctic tend to cheat a lot. Well, I don't mean that in a bad way, but they cheat in the sense they do things that other hunting and gathering groups don't do. They tend to be a little bit more complex. And one of the things we can see here is that there is some semblance of hierarchy in this food distribution system. They have to cooperate to hunt the whale because it's such a large animal. And so you have a first boat, first of all, and a second and a third boat, and it goes down through 8 boats, I think, here. And every boat gets a different chunk of the whale. Right? There's also a captain of the first boat, right, which indicates a hierarchy difference, which is unusual in groups that are generally egalitarian. So the captain of the first boat gets a big chunk. The crew of the first boat gets a big chunk. Probably that first, second, third designation is determined by the role of the group in the hunt. Right? So that may be determined by different things depending on the group. But whoever is seen to have taken the most important role, second, could be the order in which they arrive, or who spots the whale, or who kills it, or anything like that. So the captains obviously organize the boats internally, and the order of the boats is determined by the way the hunt plays out. Right, so these roles can shift at various times. You see there's a big disparity between what the captain gets and what boat 8 gets, this tiny strip of whale, which is still pretty huge. All of these people will be participating in the food sharing system, and that's what this is designed to show part of. That means when they get whatever their share is of the whale, they will then distribute it to people in order of how much they owe them. So first of all, their immediate family gets the biggest portion of what they got. They take care of the people closest to them first, and then potentially their extended family and anybody else that they owe debts to. Right. So if you're in boat 8, you may not have a lot, and you may not be able to distribute very far, but you'll have enough to eat and feed your family. The captain of the first boat, however, can't eat all this whale himself, but has a lot of connections throughout the community that he has to serve. So he has a lot more, so he has to distribute a lot more. Right. So the captain's prestige goes up a bit because he's able to do that. Crew of the first boat, again, has a little bit more prestige, but a little less than the captain in terms of what they can distribute through the community. Even if somebody is relatively unconnected, there are parts of the whale that are set aside for the entire village, first of all. So anybody who's not connected to a family, which is almost unimaginable, or they're connected to a family that's not very successful in whaling, will still get some piece of whale to eat. They also have these other parts that are set aside for festivals in which the entire village participates. And so you can see, based on this example, that food sharing down here, food sharing, it serves as a sort of social security for the group. Make sure that everybody gets enough food to eat and the group can survive as a whole. Now, again, you don't want to see the numbers slip too low in a group, otherwise it jeopardizes the entire group's security. So it's a way of distributing food, make sure everybody gets something. All right, that's the end of this section, and that's all about foragers. And the next section will be really the second half of the first half of the subsistence lecture, and we'll talk about pastoralists in that. That's the end of this one.